but through multi-pronged approaches such as radiation, chemotherapy, and if required, surgery. I will end by saying that India, through its deep spiritual tradition, already has the DNA to provide leadership to the world in good governance. It is up to us, the holders of this tradition, to bring forth and practice the philosophy of Gandhi, who to me was the embodiment of good governance, and whose spirit can be experienced in these hallowed surroundings of Rajghat. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I will go straight into my 5-minute comments. We talk about good governance. I would submit to you that we actually have no governance. We have greed, we have all kinds of other things happening, but not governance. So the question essentially is, why is it that we have failed to have governance? Because over the last 60 years or so, every single institution within the country involved with governance in any fashion, whether it's security, whether it's bureaucracy, whether it's whoever, even health, sadly, and certainly education, have been corrupted through an element of greed, and also the need of those who ostensibly are there to provide leadership of governance for their own personal greed satisfaction. They want that chair at any cost. Now, in these circumstances, what do we do? First of all, I think the question, do we need good governance, has only one answer, and I will not go into that. I think it's self-apparent that we must have governance. How do we secure governance is the question, and I believe tomorrow you're going to discuss that, but I will leave a few thoughts on that aspect. I do feel that the movement of governance needs to be, as it were, marketed amongst people. And as somebody mentioned Gandhiji, I will just say that he was probably the most successful PR marketing person that has operated in the Indian environment, because he came back from South Africa, or first time from South Africa, booted and suited as a young British English lawyer, and then converted himself through a repackaging process into the Mahatma. Now, I don't know that we will have another Mahatma among us, or whether one will emerge, but if we are to market something, you must understand what it is you need to do and approach it on that strategy. We have a number of people we've found across the country who are doing good things in small pockets, but they're so small pockets and they're so self-contained, and in many cases they are held to the bosom of the NGO, whoever's doing it, and doesn't want to share it with others. So these are the resources we have, the people. So one of the thoughts that we had in our group was that why can't we have an active citizenship movement? Not activist, because I personally am not for activism, but active citizenship movement. I think the time is right in the sense that people are now wanting a better life, and particularly the men, the women, and the young people of India. They want something better. And that energy has to be channelized. How do you channelize it? This is where I bring in the tools of modern communication, modern marketing, modern whatever. We have a communication device, whether it's through electronic communication, or whether it's through television communication, or whether it's through word of mouth, or whichever way. One has to mobilize that. Now the question comes really, because you have to understand why things have gone wrong, and I think we've got a lot of people telling us what's wrong. We don't want to rediscover the problem. We want to find a solution that brings the people together, because the larger number of people are outside Parliament and the Constituent Assembly and even the bureaucracy. So why shouldn't the majority not be able to work against this minority? So that is the concept I have. The other thing I want to say is don't use words like social justice. don't use words like national days, because that means nothing to somebody. It's too esoteric, it's too seminarish. What you need to use is better life. Simpler terms. What is it people want? They want good education, they want a decent, clean environment, they want these things. So it is summed up in something called a decent, better way of living, or a decent, clean way of living, whatever you want to call it. And if we can work towards that movement, if we can, through Congo and others, because you have NGOs, come to a sort of goal which is a simple goal, and then let each one do it, because you cannot have a national authority that will set agendas for anybody, because I think that's impossible. We're too vast a country. Somebody said we're not a Singapore, we're not a Hong Kong, but we are a multifaceted country where everybody, I think, regardless of where they are, want the same things at the end. If we can't harness that desire into a local grassroots action program, I think we're lost. And here, I do believe that you have friends both now in media, in the corporate sector, also in government, and also in political establishment, who really deeply want something better for the country. But how do we do it? So I will leave the securing to Vinoji and others who will be working in that meeting. But all I want to say to you is this, that there is no question of needing good governance, we need governance. There is no purpose lost in trying to find out what happened, where it went wrong. I think we need to tackle it head on and how to put it right. Secondly, and finally, we need to decentralize the movement. And hopefully with everybody coming together, we start a movement for governance, which is through the active citizen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lingdong. Ladies and gentlemen, I do come from a perspective called the strengths-based perspective, and that recognizes that people have strengths and capacities, people can change, people are obviously experts on their own situation. Unfortunately, we tend to reach people when they are in a problematic situation. It is at that point of time some sort of enabling ethos is required. It is in that enabling ethos most of us think that we can set people up. It is during that time and process that we tend to take the expert role on ourselves, and that's where the governance role just completely gets defeated. It is important in a country, in any democracy, to have the highest respect for the people's intrinsic worth. If we don't respect that, there isn't anything that we could actually do. If people don't have self-determination, if they don't have an opportunity to use their full potential, if their strengths are not valued, and if they can't come up to their highest extreme, if their rights, their diversity, and their uniqueness and commonalities are not recognized, what kind of a governance are we talking about? We are obviously talking about a complete social control. We are talking about a few people controlling whatever is the way by which they could manage to do so. It negates the limits of anything that we call resources. The governances that we see all around are compliance-based governances. These are not models that are looking forward for cooperation and collaboration. These are the ones which go against self-determination. They do not share power. They do not have regard for human worth. And they are not inclusive, and they are not participatory. Forget about transparency. One of the basic things that governance does is listening. Are we listening? Are the governors listening? Can we make them listen? That's the most important aspect of it. In a situation where we have governance or governors, we assume that they know everything. They know that problems can be solved, that they have all the solutions, that people do not know anything at all, and they do not regard people's strengths and capacities. That's the one which is the most dangerous government. A dangerous government is one which has got a number of people who pass off as experts. Expertise is only for us to delineate the scope and to do some methodological activities with the people. It is people who possibly know a lot more than what is required by the government. Oftentimes we see blaming poor for every failure is one of the things that happens. This creates a passive dependence, a pervasive dependence, and that's what seems to be the order of the day. People will seek, their values are not being recognized, and they are not heard, and they are not validated. It is a practice where when you start listening, you start thinking about people, when a parallel process in people can be set, they would then be in a position to come forward and work towards the governance. Governance is a two-way process. There is a need for governors themselves, in order to govern, to ensure and ask people as to what is it that they really want. It is in that process we seem to be going wrong. Thank you.
I know whether you want to listen to me or not, because it's going on to 1 o'clock. I mean, if you do, I'll say a few things, otherwise.
Yes, we do.
Sorry, do you say anything?
I want to say something.
Yeah.
Am I allowed?
If you don't take too much time. Now, friends, my colleagues here have spoken about good governance in terms of quality. I'll concentrate on strategy, precisely the point that the General was making. Now, obviously, we're not referring to e-governance, because that's not serious enough. Nor are we referring to the neoliberal World Bank view of governance as an idyllic collaboration between state and corporate sector. The state playing wet nurse, promoter, friendly regulator, and physician. And the private sector producing all the goods and services and drawing all the profits. If there were any doubts, the current deep economic recession has quite shattered the neoliberal illusion beyond retrieving. The present shining, you remember shining some years ago in the advertisements of the government of India, the present shining neoliberal plaster of 8% annual growth conceals a thickening masonry of the poor, now reckoned by several studies as 80% of the population. So evidently, good governance can only be from the point of view of this majority, not from our point of view. Good governance must work to achieve the socially, economically, and politically equitable society the Constitution demands. The pledge we took this morning, please remember it. The current economic crisis also demands that we backtrack from leaving everything to the private sector. I'm not saying you take away from the private sector, but don't leave everything to it. And that the government not only resume, but for once take seriously its primary responsibilities to the population at large. The shorthand for this is human resource development for everybody. Total HRD, in addition to agriculture, which is strictly not HRD, but cannot be left out because it's the main substance of the rural sector, needs to focus on education, health, housing, incomes, and environment. Agriculture, petroleum-based fertilizers and pesticides, which are very, very costly and degrading to the soil, and we have to lessen all this. And we have to increase biofertilizers and pesticides. And appropriate products need to be produced by the corporate sector at reasonable rates. We have to have a decreasing use of water. There's far too much water being used in agriculture associated